Ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro expected to appear in a New York court in less than 2 hours. Our next guest says his capture was just the first step in replacing the country's government with a, quote, legitimate regime. Joining us now is Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, former U.S. National Security Advisor and Special Advisor to the Mishler Financial Group. It's great to have you back, General. So were you surprised that President Trump sort of dismissed Maria Corina Machado, who's the head of the opposition, just won the Nobel Prize? And I thought, I interviewed her at Milken a few months ago, and she was talking about how the opportunity is coming for global investors to get in. I was surprised that he wasn't more positive when it comes to talking about leadership in Venezuela.
Yes, sir. I was, too. It's great to be with you. I think what happened is somebody got the president's ear and convinced him that, hey, maybe it's better to just do a deal with this vice president and keep some of Maduro's people in power. But, of course, as you've pointed out, the people destroyed that economy, and have driven 8 million people outside of the country, welcomed in our adversaries, engaged in all sorts of illicit trafficking, including narcotics and oil. So that's not going to change unless really, I think the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people is restored. That's the side we ought to be on because it aligns with our interests. And I think what happens at this phase of use of coercive diplomacy is you want the opposition to the Maduro and the Chavista regime to be unified. And you don't want to contribute to any kind of fragmentation of the opposition.
So what? You think this is a mistake? What he's doing here with the vice president?
I think it's a mistake. I think the right thing to say is, hey, the Venezuelan people decided in the last election that Maduro was out. So now it's time to empower the Venezuelan people with the change in the fundamental nature of that government. They've been in power since 1999 when Chavista came in, and look at what they've done. As you showed with the economics statistics, they've destroyed the country.
Yeah, it's very sad. So what about the move overall, the operation? What message did that send, do you think, to the world?
I think it was a very positive and powerful message. Here was a guy who was engaged in illicit activity. This was a criminal organization, masquerading as a government. He was indicted. The indictment, if you read the indictment, it's so darn compelling. This is not unprecedented, as some people were saying. It is very, very much analogous to Operation Just Cause in 1989 with Noriega. Another guy who was indicted, and another guy who was sitting on top of a criminal enterprise. A much smaller but strategically important country for reasons other than oil, because of the Panama Canal and so forth. And so I think it sends a very strong message also to those regimes that were supporting Venezuela, especially Russia, China, and Iran, and to those kind of far left progressive dictatorships that Venezuela was supporting, especially the Cuban and the Nicaraguan regime. So guess what, Sarah? Their cash flow is going to dry up. And so when the president's talking about the Cuban regime being very weak, he's right about that. Now, the sad part is these authoritarian regimes don't have to be that strong. They just need to be stronger than any organized opposition. So I think it's really important to try to isolate these authoritarian regimes from sources of strength and support. And the operation against Maduro is the first step in doing that as well.
Well, what happens now then? You make the analogy to Panama. We can all hope that would be the case. But as you point out, sir, far smaller country, kind of a different scenario in many ways. This is a country with 30 million people, obviously geographically very large. As you point out, an armed opposition still in there. So what do you think is going to actually have to happen to stabilize this and make it work?
Well, it's going to have to be, I think, a stronger form of intervention, I think what the administration doesn't want to do is, as you guys have been talking about, is just they don't want to put large numbers of troops on the ground. Remember the Panama invasion in a country that was 1/10 the size of Venezuelan population, 1/12 the size in landmass, took about 30,000 troops. The Dominican Republic operation in 1965, which also was a successful intervention, I think you could say, it was about 42,000 troops. So what the administration is trying is coercive diplomacy, an effort to try to convince the government to fire itself, and to reform itself in a fundamental way. I think the chances of that are kind of slim. It's because really what you have to do is you have to have a clear objective, which I think we can just clarify our objective a little bit more. We have to make clear what we're demanding in terms of the change in the nature of government. And I think it ought to be in favor of the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people so that their will is reflected in that government associated with a restoration of the Constitution. And then I think we have to make clear what kind of punishment we're gonna deliver, because we have to convince those who are in power in Venezuela that we want them out more than they want to stay in. And they're incentivized to stay in right now because, hey, they were making a hell of a lot of money. And by the way, I don't think other Venezuelans are going to be too kind to them once they leave power, given the degree to which they've victimized their own people.
So 2 questions. One is, what happens if the will of the Venezuelan people is hands off our oil? And 2, does this give China the green pass the free pass to go into Taipei using the same framework of law enforcement that we're using?
Yeah, well, hey, I think, first of all, we have to make the point in favor of Venezuelan sovereignty, right? We're not there to take their oil. We're there. We would come in with U.S. companies and U.S. investment to help the people profit from the tremendous wealth of that country. And I think, the language that we use sometimes is unfortunate in that connection, or that the administration has been using. And we have to make it clear, we're in favor of the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people. And it's really U.S. investments and U.S. companies who can help them realize that potential. On your second point, this is really important. I think this is why to not have this analogy of hey, well, maybe it's okay for the Chinese Communist Party to try to, and the People's Liberation Army to try to take Taiwan by force, is again going back to the sovereignty argument and being in favor of sovereign nations who respect the sovereignty of their people. That's what the case is in Taiwan, right? That's a successful democracy, and the claims of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party to Taiwan, are specious, right? And make clear this difference, between the criminal regime and Maduro's actions and activities since 2013 when he took over from Chavez, and contrast that with Taiwan.